Well, here we're talking about chapter 4, the self. And one of the things I've continually encouraged you to do in this study of these fundamental questions in philosophy is to think of them as questions, or to think of them more specifically as problems. Again, I think that philosophy can be a fairly vague thing. People say so and so is a great philosopher, and no doubt it's probably true, but no one can really sort of sometimes say exactly why. What did they contribute? What is philosophy about? I mean, what would it mean to be a great philosopher? Um, well, that's a great question, and not one that I can really answer. But one of the things you want to do is in philosophy is to get some sense of what the questions are, what the problems are. That's really, I think, the first and most important step in philosophy is to understand a philosophical problem, and to work it through in your mind to see why it's a problem, and then begin to see how there are rival solutions, proposed solutions to that problem. We've seen it already with a number of questions. Question of freedom, question of mind, that there's a problem, or a set of problems, and there are different solutions, and philosophers are the people who try to work these things out. With that preface, let's take a look at the problem of the self. Of course, there is more than one problem, one could say, but what's the initial problem of the self? What is there something that we can really sort of get into and hang on to? Well, in the opening pages of this chapter, Blackburn's chapter on the self, for instance, on page 122, okay, there's a quote from David Hume, and I think that if we oppose a certain intuition that Descartes gave us about the self, what kind of thing the self is, and Hume's objection here, really skeptical objection to that, we begin to see an emerging problem of the self. And how could we put that? Well, on the one hand, thinkers like Descartes would say that we know ourselves better than we know anything else. I mean, I think, therefore I am. That is, I know that I'm thinking, and I know, therefore, that I exist, seems to imply that I can know myself. And that I can know myself, that is, that I can know myself really better than anything else, or with more certainty than anything else. That there's an intuitively certain knowledge of myself that I don't have with other things, which is less immediate. So the self, therefore, would be something, again, that would be a thing that I simply know. But what does Hume say in this? This is an excerpt from his work. This is the bottom of page 122, top of page 123. He says, "For my part, when I enter most intimately into what I call myself," and that sounds like Descartes, sort of enter into your own thoughts, try to just be very careful about what you're thinking and what you're experiencing. When I enter most intimately into what I call myself, I always stumble upon some particular perception or other of heat or cold, light or shade, love or hatred, pain or pleasure. I never can catch myself at any time without a perception, and never can observe anything but the perception. When my perceptions are removed for any time, as by sound sleep, so long am I insensible of myself, and may truly be said not to exist. And were all my perceptions removed by death, and could I neither think, nor feel, nor see, nor love, nor hate, after the dissolution of my body, I should be entirely annihilated, nor do I conceive what is further requisite to make me a perfect non-entity. And it's a very interesting objection there, and let's concentrate on the first part of it, where he says, well, do we ever actually perceive ourselves? Now, on the one hand, we seem to know ourselves better than we know anything, and the existence of the self is that rock upon which Descartes builds his whole philosophy. On the other hand, do we ever have a single perception of the self? Do we ever perceive something called the self? Do I ever perceive myself? Hume seems to indicate no, we don't perceive ourselves. Any perception is a perception of something. But what is the perception of? Of heat or cold, light or shade, love or hatred, pain or pleasure. That is for some particular sensation that I'm having, some particular feeling, some particular perception of what I take to be the external world. That is, the content of my perception is never myself. My content, the content of my perception seems to be something other than myself, some particular content that comes and goes. So, do we ever really perceive ourselves? Hume seems to indicate no. No, we do not. And if we go back to Descartes, Descartes says, I think, therefore I am. Okay, now think about that. What kind of a statement is that? Well, Descartes could not doubt that he was thinking, that he was perceiving something. Now, what he could doubt was whether any of his perceptions were true, but he could not doubt that he was thinking. So that seemed to be indubitable. So that thinking is something that's immediately certain. I think, therefore I am. That is, Descartes didn't even really suggest that we could have a direct perception, intuition, knowledge of, experience of the self. The existence of the self was a logical inference from perception and thought and feeling and mental activity. That is, it seems to be a logical necessity that if there is thinking going on, then someone must be thinking, and in my case, that someone is myself. But that would mean that I don't ever directly experience myself, that I directly experience whatever is the content of my particular experience. And on the basis of that, I logically infer, that is, on the basis of that I infer that I must exist. And it sounds silly, but it seems to be the reality of it, perhaps. So, okay, how is this a problem? Well, okay, it seems to be on the one hand that we do know ourselves better than we know anything else, and that our own existence is something that we couldn't possibly doubt. On the other hand, do we ever have a direct experience of ourselves, or really any experience of ourselves? We have experience of all sorts of mental activities which we take to be our mental activities. That is, I am speaking now, I'm feeling, I'm thinking, and my assumption is all my thoughts, feelings, and actions are my thoughts. They're performed by me and performed by myself. But when it comes down to it, do I ever perceive myself? Maybe not. It may be that the self that I think I know so immediately and directly is simply a kind of a construction. At the very least, an inference, not something I know directly, but something I infer must exist on the basis of other things which I do know. So I think that is a fairly well-constructed problem in philosophy, knowledge of the self. On the one hand, it's problematic because they both seem to be pretty good arguments or pretty good positions. And on the one hand, I know myself better than I know anything else. But on the other hand, I never really experienced myself, so how can I be said to know myself? I think that that's a problem in philosophy, and it points to other problems, as we see in this essay, the problems of personal identity, the nature of the self, and things like that.